just like to have everyone thank Kristen and the people at Time Warner, Leah Fishman, June Honey, Nader in the back, and Mark for making us feel so at home today. So I want to thank everyone at Time Warner for hosting us at the CDO Summit. Thank you.
Oh, so nice. Thank you. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Let me just grab that. Sorry. Well, thanks, everybody. I know Leah and others at Time Warner told me that we shouldn't start at 8 a.m. We should start later. But I'm glad you're all here. I hope you all had breakfast. I want to thank also all of our sponsors. Make sure you visit them. They're the first ones you see as you go past the exhibit hall. And we couldn't do it without them. So thanks to all of our sponsors. And thanks to all the speakers. I see there are some speakers here already this morning, so I really appreciate that. And our advisory board members for the CDO Summit. So I want to thank everybody very much. My task usually, first thing, is to kind of give a state of chief digital officers. And I want to say, too, starting out, this is the first year that I started tracking chief data officers as well. So that's going to be a little bit exciting. I'm not going to get too much into the data details, but you can read all about it in the talent map. I'm just going to give a quick overview as to why I think it's important that we start tracking that space as well. We did do, for those chief digital officers in the room and those watching on the live stream and in the video archives, last year I did the talent map kind of on my own, did interviews with a lot of chief digital officers, did some stuff online. But this year, we were fortunate that we had Object Frontier Software. Is Rich, the president of Object Frontier, here? That's Rich back there, president and CEO of Object Frontier Software. And Susanna, is Susanna here as well? Susanna and Denise Houghton created an incredibly beautiful survey for chief digital officers. It only takes about 10 minutes. And I would include also in that group, others besides chief digital officers, anyone really running digital at their organization. And if you could, it would be great. We've sent that survey out to chief digital officer list. And if you haven't received that and you'd like to participate, I would encourage you. Obviously, the more data we have, the more information we can provide back to you and to journalists and analysts in the space. So when I see Susanna come back in, I'll make a point to point you out. So that's going to be my presentation. I'm going to make sure we cover the chief digital officer space, specifically in 2013, because there were a number of pretty interesting changes this year and some really significant hires at insurance companies, banking companies, food and beverage, like McDonald's hired a chief digital officer. So we're going to take a look at some of that as well. You go straight to, this is the survey that was created by Object Frontier Software. As I mentioned, it's a relatively, as you all know, it's a relatively new role. The first chief digital officer was hired in 2005 by MTV, which was clearly disrupted by things like Napster in the early days of the internet. And so this is our follow-up to the talent map. We really want to dig deeper this year into budgets and skill sets. How big of a budget do you manage as a chief digital officer? And I think when we can start to look at that in the aggregate, we could really get an idea of how big this market is, and we can start doing some more interesting projections for analysts and for journalists. We also want to look at the internal organization, who do the CDOs report to? In most cases, we're finding they report into the CDO, and we're finding the most successful CDOs are reporting into the top, so they have buy-in across the organization. And last, again, in looking at their budget, what's the technology decision making? Are they getting increasing budgets? Is this coming at the expense of the chief marketing officer or the chief technology officer or the CIO? So there are some interesting dynamics at play. And again, looking at this both individually and in the aggregate should make some interesting statistics. So we will be, I believe, looking, so this presentation, what I found was interesting in 2013 was how many chief digital officers became CEO and how many became board members. But I have a really surprising stat. I mean, we were quoted in the Financial Times and by McKinsey and Company and the MIT Sloan Management Review on our original research that showed that 7 CDOs became CEO and 4 CDOs became board members in 2013. But what I wasn't quoted on, I think is going to be really surprising to you all. So we're going to get into that in just a little bit. The results, I should say also, they're being compiled anonymously, so feel free to get those surveys, and I'll point out Susanna when she comes back in. So without further ado, here's what happened in 2013 in the Chief Digital Officer space. Globally, we've grown from 1 Chief Digital Officer in 2005 to almost 500 last year, and it has doubled every year since 2005. I'm basically projecting. I want to be very conservative. I don't want to blow smoke. I want to make sure that we're being realistic about our projections. If it's doubled every year since 2005, I'm just conservatively estimating we're going to have another 500 hired this year, which should bring us to 1,000 Chief Digital Officers globally by the end of 2014. The salaries we talked about, some go a little bit higher. You're going to find some interesting salaries in the Chief Data Officer space. Chief data officers in municipal government don't make as much, but at banks and insurance companies, they're making over 7 figures. This is a very important strategic position, obviously. I mentioned before the first Chief Digital Officer was Jason Hirschhorn. He was hired by MTV in 2005. The second was, again, in the media space. George Kliakoff, some of you remember, was NBC Universal. And then it just exploded. And where it really exploded, it started in media and in publishing, but it really exploded in the advertising sector. And then we also saw it grow in other sectors as well. I'm going to show some of that growth today. So this is the chart from 2005. As you can see, we're projecting 2014 numbers to be 1,000. Now, the interesting thing about that far right number is that Gartner is actually projecting it to triple. So they might know something that I don't know, and I would say that if they do, it's probably their base of CIOs, CTOs. A lot of those people are taking on the responsibility they are already doing the job of Chief Digital Officers. So we may see a lot of CIOs take on the CIDO title, but this could triple next year, and we could find 1,500 Chief Digital Officers by this time next year very easily, if Gartner's correct. So as I mentioned, this is new for me in tracking the Chief Data Officer space. Has anybody heard of Chief Data Officers as well? Yeah, it's a new title becoming in vogue, but it's not a new position and certainly not new. Chief Data Officer positions could be called Chief Data Scientist, Chief Analytics Officer, any one of those variations above. But here's the interesting stats. So again, I don't know many others that are tracking it. I know Gartner is. So here's the weird thing about Gartner with these two groups, right? Gartner seems to be putting their thumb on the scales of Chief Digital Officer growth, but they seem to be sandbagging when it comes to Chief Data Officers, and I have no idea why. But they were basically projecting 2 years ago that by 2015, 25% of all organizations would have a Chief Digital Officer. That's only a year from now. I called them out last year and said that's a little aggressive. 25% of all organizations is really high. But again, I think we should have between 1,000 and 1,500. Interestingly enough, on the Chief Data Officer side, they're the only ones who've come up with stats on Chief Data Officers. And they're saying that there are 100 Chief Data Officers with that exact title today globally. But I've counted 200. And I'm only one person, not a giant organization like Gartner. So I don't know why I'm coming up with more people with that title than they are. But that's what I have, is about just under 200 Chief Data Officers as of today. It started in 2003 in the banking industry. No, that's not true. It goes way back before 2003, right? You've always had a need for analyzing data. And it really started in earnest at Google and at Amazon and at Netflix and at Yahoo. All the digital natives that get it, right? They understand that in order to do business today, especially online, you have to understand the data about your customers. And the more data you have, not only the more data you have, but the better that you can analyze it and act on it to get the right information to the right person at the right time, your business is going to excel in this age. So before 2003, before this title came around, You had a lot of growth in this space, but it was mostly in the digital natives. In 2003, we started to get a clue in banking, and the first chief data officer was hired at a bank. But then it started to, it kind of slowly grew in banking and insurance, but where we saw it really explode was in 2008 and 2009. We all remember the financial crisis. Government came in, stepped in, insurance banks, we need to regulate data more effectively. We need someone in charge of governance and compliance, regulatory risk, litigation. If they ever get sued, they need to have everything from your email uncovered by regulators and by litigants. So it became a real critical role at banks and insurance companies and other regulated industries. That I would include medical and pharma and others as well. So that's what happened, why you see the growth start to really expand in 2008, 2009. But then, 2011 to date is really crazy. I mean, almost every company, I see chief data officers hired in retail, in CPG, in small mom and pop shops. Just about everybody is getting on the data train. So I want to make sure that we're covering both of these. I think we're the only ones doing it, and it's turning out to be a real fascinating exercise. By the way, since it's kind of slow this morning, feel free to raise your hand. We do have some mics if anybody does have any questions. I don't want to jump on to the next topic if you do have a question on chief data or digital officers. So what ended up happening was I was just quoted in Forbes 2 weeks ago by my old friend Dan Woods, who may even be here. Dan Woods writes for CITO Research, CITO. He's been, I met him when he was chief information officer at TheStreet.com in 1997. So Dan's been around for quite a while and has been doing this for quite a while. And is considered an expert on the field. But his article was titled, "Don't Let a Chief Digital Officer Steal the Best Parts of Your Job," right? Because, if you think about the pressure that CIOs are under, you got to keep the lights on. We need, data recovery in case of disaster, in case of risk. And certainly if there is a disaster and you've lost everything or you believe you've lost everything, even a chief digital officer is going to call the CIO, right? So I honestly don't believe CIOs are going to disappear anytime soon, but their role is dramatically changing. And what they end up being left with after the chief digital officer takes all the exciting innovation and front-end development away from the CIO, and the chief data officer comes in and starts taking all the interesting, data and data governance and acquisition and integration and all these, taxonomies and metadata. What's left for the CIO except to keep the lights on at the company? But I would again suggest that when a disaster strikes and you need to recover your data, you're going to go to the CIO. But at any rate, this is the dynamic that's going on now. What parts of the business are the chief digital and data officers taking away from the CIOs, the CTOs, and the CMOs? And I think that's driving a lot of the conversation. My point, I was interviewed by iCIO. CIOs right now, I think that's why Gartner's saying we're going to see a tripling, is because CIOs are rebranding themselves to stay relevant in this digital age. And that's the same thing, we're seeing a tremendous growth. So what's the CDO story? I'm going to go to chief digital officers first because we all know this. I went over this last year. It's the same slide. We find that chief digital officers in general, to do any title justice, you have to look at it by sector. But let's just consider it in general right now. Superstar CDOs, they're strategic. They can execute not only, look, the first job of a CDO is to come in and build the digital strategy. The second job is to build the team, right? Get buy-in across the entire organization. The third job is to execute on that vision. So these are people that, they're at the top of their game. They're usually reporting into the highest levels of the organization. They have to have buy-in from the silos across the entire company. They're relationship builders, really strong at networking, and they can manage, and usually they're the people who can automatically, build a team. They've got a great following of dedicated, loyal employees, and they can recruit and manage talent. They're also entrepreneurial and somewhat innovative. Let's go to a chief data officer and see a completely different skill set, but one that's just as important in the internet age. Chief data officers are a completely different animal. They're the people who are in charge of everything from compliance and governance to security and permissions, But while bringing in all this data and integrating it into your system, they're also the ones who have to look out for your privacy and your security and to make sure that they have the right to do things with this data. So it's everything from metadata to data quality, data acquisition, data integration, data mass, content management, knowledge management. This is an interesting beast. So that's why we see it is so important in the municipal sector, and that's why we're seeing tremendous growth in local governments, because we have all of these open data initiatives from the federal level, the state level, and the local level, where we're getting even more data out there. And now, of course, we're getting all this data in from social channels, from mobile channels. What do we do with all this data? So we're hiring somebody who is tasked with managing this team and managing all that data. That's why I think it's important to track. Do you all agree? I mean, do you think this is something I should be tracking? I feel like if no one else is doing it, I might as well. And I think they kind of, they're both playing in kind of an interesting space, and I think just as critical a role. So having said that, I'd like to go back to chief digital officers and look at the talent map and say, what's changed in 2013? This is the core of my presentation, which should be done in about 20 minutes. But I found some interesting things. So I have pretty much interviewed or been in touch with every CDO on earth, and we found that, it's still from 2013, from 2005 to 2013, we found is just about 80% male. The change from 2013 to 2014, sorry, I went backwards, and 91% white in 2013 has gone to just a little change, still mostly male-dominated in 2014 and almost all white. A little bit of an increase in Asian population of chief digital officers, and mostly that's driven by a dramatic increase in international and some Asian hires of CDOs. The age distribution still didn't change much. These are seasoned, mature professionals. These aren't, it's not your nephew with a MySpace page. These are real, seasoned, mature veterans. 40 to 49 years old. Really, it's like, 85% are between 30 and 50, and 99% are between 30 and 59, right? So not many 20-somethings. And didn't change much to 2014. Matter of fact, I'll go back and show you, and look at 2013, and look at 2014. Not much change at all. So this is the interesting slide to me, is the growth that we've seen across all sectors. So last year, when we presented, the large majority of chief digital officers were in the advertising sector. So 40% of CDOs were in advertising, and we found it ran neck and neck in second place with media and publishing both at 15%. And then slowly after that, we had 9% in the nonprofit space. But just to set expectations, nonprofit included not only nonprofit organizations, but municipal government and, what was the other one? There's one more in there. It'll come to me. Oh, education, thank you, David. Yeah, David Payne. Higher ed, MIT, Columbia, Harvard, and organizations like Kaplan. But you saw the long tail as 2013, we saw some growth in retail, PR, et cetera. So in 2014, you see how the numbers have changed. Media has grown, we're about 18%. Publishing is kind of slowing, and it might be just that every publishing company, large ones that need a CDO already have one. And the nonprofit space is growing as well. But interestingly enough, financial services, banking, medical, and we're also going to get into beverage, food and beverage, some really odd places. McDonald's hired a CDO. When I say odd, I don't mean odd. I think it's natural. But it just, you wouldn't think McDonald's would have a chief digital officer, but there you go. Geographically, so let's look at the geographic distribution. Again, this was 2005 to 2013. We saw the large majority of CDOs in North America, 88% in North America, and not many in Europe or Asia or Australia. But what we found this year was the States went down a little bit at the expense of Europe. European hires of CDOs exploded last year. So if there were about 250 CDOs hired, the majority of them were hired outside of North America. And we've seen chief digital officers hired everywhere from Turkey last year, from Turkey to the United Arab Emirates, to Qatar, to Vietnam, Thailand. A lot of that is driven by advertising agencies, but tremendous growth globally. So in the United States, how has that growth changed? This was 2005 to 2013. Large majority of chief digital officers on the Northeast corridor. And You see some down in the Southeast. That could include advertising agencies in Atlanta, could include beverage. Washington, D.C. is included in that figure. That includes a lot of nonprofit organizations. In the Midwest, that would include Chicago, which has some advertising agencies like DDB, and of course, big retail. Minnesota has Best Buy and Target, as you probably know. The West Coast at 16%. Again, municipal, not big need for chief digital officers at digital natives, but certainly there is some hiring going on there. The change this year was we saw a little bit more wider distribution, 42% in the Northeast, and we saw a growth in Central and on the West Coast. So, I'm going to come back to this slide. This was an article written by the Harvard Business Review called, "Do You Have the Digital Leaders That You Need?" And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the backgrounds and the skill sets of chief digital officers. So our big news this year, as I mentioned earlier, is that 7 CDOs became CEO and 4 CDOs in 2013 became board members. But I wanted to dig down deeper and to try to find out why that was happening. So what I did was I went deep into hundreds of backgrounds and looked backwards instead of forwards. I looked back at their skill sets, and there are 2 interesting stats that just jumped out at me that are kind of mind-boggling, actually. In the advertising sector alone, almost 2/3 of CDOs in the ad sector were previously CEO, president, or general manager. That's a mind-boggling figure. Right? I want to repeat it. 60% of CDOs in the ad sector were previously CEO. So isn't it natural then that you've got 7 CDOs becoming CEOs last year? I actually think it should have been a lot higher. These are people who obviously have general management skills. They've run companies before. They've had P&L responsibility. And it's very clear that the time is right for these people to step up. And that's why I had this Harvard article. I'm going to come back to it. So that was in the advertising sector. So I decided, well, let me look in a couple other sectors and see what's driving this career path. So I found that in the media sector, 30%, actually it was 33, so fully 1/3 of chief digital officers in the media sector were previously CEO. Well, let me give you some examples to make it easier for you. Everybody knows Vivian Schiller. I'm assuming she gave a keynote last year at our first summit. Vivian was CEO of NPR. Now, Vivian has had a very storied career in media, right? She was at New York Times, she was at Discovery, but she was a CEO at National Public Radio. She, if you could excuse me for this argument, she went from a CEO to a CDO, arguably took a step down. But we're finding that's happening a lot. A lot of CEOs are becoming CDO temporarily in a career move. So let's look at just Vivian for 1 second. She was CEO of NPR, then she became CDO at NBC News, and now she's head of news and journalism partnerships at Twitter. So title-wise, she looks like she's going down, but I would argue that in terms of impact, her career has just taken an incredible trajectory, right? So I think the titles don't matter, but that's one example of a CDO who was previously CEO. And as I said, to think that there is 60% in advertising, and maybe, so she's in media, maybe it's worth exploring why that happened in advertising. Right? And I think there are some guys or gals in the advertising sector here. I want to make this participatory because I'm navel-gazing here. Why do you suppose 2/3 of CDOs were previously CEO in the ad sector? I'm assuming it's because in the early days of the internet, right, you had a lot of incumbent ad agencies that just didn't get it. And then when social came around, a lot of ad agencies just didn't get it. And then mobile came around, and we see this repeating over and over. So you saw a lot of bright, young, and seasoned ad executives jumping out of these giant corporations and putting up their own shingle and creating their own ad agency, right? And we saw this with Agency. Chan Su, who's the founder of Agency.com, is going to be here and speak. And others, Razorfish. You saw a lot of interesting ad companies come out. And then the incumbents, 10 years later, realize, wow, we just missed the boat, so they go on an acquiring spree. And you call it acquire, where they hire the talent, and they bring in all of these ad agency execs back to the fold, and they have no place, no title to give them, so they give them the title of chief digital officer. So I'm assuming that that's what happened in the ad sector, and that's why it's so high. I'd love to hear your thoughts either now or at the break, but I think that those are some interesting stats. But we'll look at that a little bit more. We've got a panel coming up tomorrow Wednesday morning on from CDO to CEO. We'll dig into that a little bit more deeply. So why do I have the Harvard Business Review article up? This article argues that there aren't enough digital leaders on boards in the United States and abroad. And I find that crazy when you look around this room and there's so much digital talent right here. You're all board ready. And I want to go over a couple of these to give you some ideas. So here's what that Harvard Business Review article said. Only 9 companies in the Fortune 500, that's less than 2% of the Fortune 500, are what they call digitally savvy. Again, that's kind of shocking. Now, if you go from the Fortune 500 to the Fortune 100, it gets even worse. There's only 7% that they consider highly digital. And all of those companies are already tech savvy, right? So I could name them. It's Amazon, it's Apple, it's Cisco, it's Dell, it's IBM. It's, of course, those boards have digitally savvy leaders. So then I looked abroad and said, is the same problem happening outside of North America? And sure enough, article written last year that Britain's boardrooms are also suffering from a digital deficit. So the Telegraph said that only 3 of the UK's top 350 companies have 3 or more tech-savvy board members. And I wonder why that is, because again, I live and breathe digital, and I see all these people out there, and I wonder, well, they're all right here. So what is it we need to do at the CDO Summit, and what is it that we need to do at the CDO Club to help you all prepare for your career as a board member and your career as a CEO? What are the skills that you need to acquire? What are the things that you need to do, or the networks you need to be in place in order for you to break that ceiling? Because once you do, getting that first board slot, it's just in a public company, it's just a wonderful badge of honor for all of you. So we're dedicated to trying to help you do that. I would say, I'm going to name the 4 CDOs who became board members last year because they deserve this recognition. Most of you know Rob Norman. Rob Norman is Chief Digital Officer at Group W, I believe. Group M. It was one of those letters. I had 20 more chances. Rob was appointed to the board of the BBC Global News, and I'm really excited for him. I'd love to get him to be a keynote at one of these events. Jonathan Miller, who was supposed to keynote last year, when sadly his uncle, Norman Schwarzkopf, passed away. They had a funeral for him at West Point. But Jonathan also is on the board was appointed to the board of BBC Global News. Now, Jonathan's a unique individual, obviously. He was president of AOL. He was CDO at News Corp and reported directly to Rupert Murdoch. And he's also on the board of Shari Murdoch's Advancit, which is sort of like a VC firm. So he obviously gets a lot of deal flow with other board opportunities. But that's the second one. The third one was Jim Barr, B-A-R-R. Jim Barr is Chief Digital Officer and Executive Vice President over at OfficeMax. He's also on the board of Sears, but he was appointed to the board of Shop.org, which is the digital division of the National Retail Foundation. So that's the third CDO board member. And the fourth was Bruno Leclerc, who was appointed to the board of IAB Canada. But I believe that there are other people, some in this room, David Payne, CDO of Gannett, USA Today, clearly ready to make the leap into the board world. Vivian Schiller is another one that clearly is ready for a board role. Bernardo Rodriguez at Kaplan, Jason Taffler over at Rogers, and many others. Elizabeth Scott is here, all worthy of board slots. So I would say if that's of interest to you, we would love to chat. My partner is here, Jay Rosenzweig. We'd love to chat with you about opportunities there. There's many more. And as I said, stay tuned. We're going to roll out some more, hopefully, helpful information for you to start making those career choices. So there are the 4 board members and a couple others. We'll give a shout out to some folks. And that was the Chief Digital Officer map for 2014. And as I said, the print version of this is going to be a little bit more detailed. If it wasn't detailed enough last year, now we're adding chief data officers. We may break these into 2 separate reports, but I think it's important that we report on both of these trends because they're definitely affecting our industry. So with exactly 57 seconds left to go, I'd love to open it up for questions, but I don't want to put people on the spot. But if anybody does have any questions or comments on the talent map, I'd love to hear them. Thank you. Anyone? Yes, Janice Ellig, Chaddock Ellig. I think we have a mic. I don't want you to, you shout, okay.
Do you have any data for compensation for the chief data for analytics?
Yeah. So Janice Ellig, also another one who can help not only everyone get on boards, but specializes in helping women break that barrier and get onto boards. Definitely meet with her. Her question was, any data on compensation for chief data officers? So that one's kind of all over the map, and here's why. You see, like in the municipal sector, New York City, New York State, any local government, you know, it's a six-figure job. It's a lot of work for a little bit of money, so it's truly the decent and honorable public servants taking those jobs for values-based positions. But as you go up into, for example, Citibank, 2 years ago hired their first chief data officer, and it was a $1.1 million annual cash compensation with a $400,000 bonus. So that was a $1.5 million all-in compensation package for a chief data officer at a bank in New York City. And that may vary across regions. And I would say that the scale, you know, goes up in between. So in the media sector, you'd see something different. And, you know, big guys like Amazon and Google and Netflix and Apple, they're paying a lot of money for this position. But the interesting thing is a person working in a municipal government is doing relatively the same work that somebody at some of these other larger organizations. So the challenge right now, Janice, I think, is getting the talent. That there's so much need for that role, and very few people who have those skills, because the skills are really wide. You not only need to understand how to get what data you need, what data you have, how to integrate that all into the system, but then you also need to know permission, security, governance, litigation, you know, all of these other sort of regulatory issues depending on what sector you're in. Those people aren't easy to find. And interestingly enough, like, I think some of them not only have mathematics background, but behavioral psychology and also legal background to understand the legal ramifications of the data they're bringing in. It's a unique animal. So thank you for that question. Yeah, that's David Gaspar from DDG.
So I think there's a great presentation on the what of the CDO. Looking at the why, so if you speak to a CDO and they're not sure they need a CDO, how do you convince them? What do you tell them?
Yeah, the question is, how do you convince, we did a good job on the what, but not the why. How do you convince someone that they actually need a chief digital officer? If your business, my answer would be, if your business is in the midst of disruption, right? If you're at a point where maybe your competitor has hired a digital leader, not necessarily a CDO, that would be an indication that you really need to, not necessarily centralize the strategy, but bring someone in who can create the strategy and then get buy-in across the entire organization. And it's clear why MTV was the first hire, right? Because the biggest disruption in the internet age in 1999 was Napster, and it affected the music industry, and after that, the entertainment industry. So to answer your question, I would say, why do you think MTV hired the first CDO, right, in 2003? In 2005, actually, they waited 6 years. It was 6 years too late. And then the next company that hired a CDO was NBC, an entertainment company. They thought that they were next in line after music to be completely disrupted. And so I think, you know, maybe this year, that's why we're seeing hires at Sephora, Microsoft in France, McDonald's hired a CDO. We have CDOs at Starbucks and at Red Bull. You know, you wouldn't necessarily think that those are industries that are being disrupted, but certainly they are. So does that answer your question? A little bit.
Reactive hire or is that proactive hire?
Well, it depends, but I would say up to date, it's been very reactive, and it's been, you know, based on disruption. But now I think it's that not only companies, but all organizations will talk to Rachel Hote later, who was CDO of New York City and now Chief Digital Officer of New York State. I think Governor Cuomo is being very proactive because you don't see many Chief Digital Officers in the municipal sector. And so I think it's a forward-looking thing for them. And that takes it out of the competitive market of, you know, businesses and puts it squarely in how digital is bigger than just making more revenues from digital assets. It's about taking out the friction between the government and the citizens. It's about increasing communication between people. first responders when disasters strike, right? Like, this is a much bigger picture than just corporations. So I think that's a very proactive version of hiring chief digital officers. Yeah, can you get a mic? He's a little far. Oh, great, thank you.
David Dorian, Ben Coyle, Teaming Media. I'm wondering if you think this is a short-term wave or blip, and over time, the skills of the chief digital officer become so imbued in the company that there is really not the position or even the need for the position. I mean, you made the comment about companies like, well, I don't remember which companies, but you wrote that there are some companies were saying they are that, and so there's no need for that position. I think at a company like a Facebook or something like, or an Instagram, that they are digital. There is no need for a chief digital officer. I'm wondering, you know, that's kind of behind my question of, is this a blip that we will see go away?
I think it's already happening. You know, I think that's why we're doing a panel from CDO to CEO tomorrow, is because, so there's the 2 points to your question. One is the digital natives that don't need chief digital officers, and the other is the incumbents or municipals or whatever it might be that have to get somebody in that can help with the strategy and then execution. So on the digital native side, you're right. There's really no need for Netflix or Google to have it. It's like, as Tom Helm pointed out last year, it's like having a chief radio officer at Clear Channel. You don't need it. But on the other hand, with incumbents, what we're already seeing, we saw 7 CDOs last year become CEO. I'm hoping that increases. I'm hoping that as these CDOs jump in and help these organizations become digital, we're going to see more and more CDOs becoming CEO. They're next in line. You know, it's only natural that if they do the job they're supposed to do, which is help bring that company into the digital age, they're probably next in line to become CEO of the organization. And that, to me, is the goal. I think that's what I hope that's what most of us are working for. Certainly at a nonprofit, you're not going to become executive director, or you're not going to become the governor just because you're a CDO of New York State. But certainly in the incumbent space, I think that's going to happen, and I hope that happens soon. Yeah. But I should say, having said that, I would say the chief digital officer title, I don't believe is going to go away. I think it's just going to increase. We're seeing that growth. It's doubling every year. And I think that's going to continue for a while. I would say that'll continue for at least the next 5 years. I'm right in line with what Gartner's thinking on that. And I think that's just because over time, these digital natives are going to become CEO of the organization, or at least have a chief strategy officer or other role. Yep.
Hey, Dave. Jose Temez. We've spoken a bunch of times.
Thanks, Jose.
Haven't met yet. In regards to his question over there, I don't see it as a blip. Actually, we do executive search at Mobile Search Partners. We do search in the mobile and digital space. From what we're seeing and what we're hearing, it's more about what's the CDO position going to look like in a year or two. Because some companies have somewhat of a defined idea of what it's going to be today, but yet it changes, it osmoses into something else, which is still not defined yet. So I think that we'll continue to see the growth of it, just what I'm seeing, some of our clients and what we're hearing. But what is it going to be is what is not too certain. How will it integrate with CIOs, CMOs, maybe this chief data officer, things like that. In regards to what was asked earlier, in regards to the skill set, you mentioned in your presentation, the skill set for this position is extremely unique.
Right.
It's very hard to find. Dave comes out of the search business. I've had some of my clients come to me and say, we want this, this, and this, and this, and I run out of paper for what they want. And I try to find out, well, give me a ranking of what's most important. And even when we narrow it down to 3 or 4 areas, it's very difficult to find that person.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is a lot of these skills, most of them, they're either innate or acquired, but there's no training program in any corporation or no center of training that's putting these people together with the defined title of, these are going to be CDOs. And so there's a lot of ambiguity in regards to that, but a lot of uncertainty as to where they come from. And as you alluded to in your presentation, as the growth of the demand becomes exponential, the supply is still incremental, if that.
Right.
So there's that huge gap out there. But what it does in the end from our experiences, and Dave will probably share that with you, is just like any other rare commodity, obviously increases the value, of that particular commodity.
That's why salaries are so high.
That's why the salaries will continue to escalate, But anyhow.
Oh, great points. And I couldn't have paid for a better segue to the next panel, which is all about, I think we're looking at chief digital officer skills across sectors. And what I did, Steve, who's done another great job, Steve Whitby in the back, another great job with all of the panelists' presentations. But I gave him a document that was way too long, and I gave him all these LinkedIn profiles. So I said, here's apparel, here's banking, here's food and beverage, and I gave him 2 CDOs and a link to their LinkedIn profiles from every one of those sectors because for the next panel, because I wanted to show exactly what Jose was talking about, that you can't do this title justice without going into a sector analysis. And so I gave great examples, but we have, I think, about 5 or 6 that we're going to pull up. But again, that's a great segue to the next panel, which is all about looking at the skill sets and, what is a CDO in different industries. So we're going to take a look at that next. Any other questions? That's a great segue. I should probably stop it there, and I know I've run over time. But I would thank you all very much, and I hope you take the time to enjoy the day. Sorry, was there one more? Oh, yeah, Susanna. Susanna did just such a great job. Susanna Caparos from Object Frontier Software. Yeah, she did a great job on just a really easy-to-use survey. It's all online, only takes 15 minutes, 12 minutes, 14 minutes. 11 to 14 minutes to fill out. And our data is only as good as the information that you give us. So I'd really appreciate it. CDOs in the room and online would take the time. And if you don't have it, she has copies of it as well. So thanks, Susanna. And thanks, everybody. We're going to get the next panel set up. Thanks very much.